our next presenter. I'll tell you a little bit about him. Probably one of the most, what's that commercial? The most interesting man alive, right, guy? Well, this guy's one of those. I heard about him 4 or 5 years ago through the cypherpunk community. Actually listened to a radio podcast called agoristradio.com. Anybody know that? Okay, we'll see who the rebels are here if you dare to raise your hand. So, that's when I first heard about Bitcoin, and then he got to start talking about this thing called open transactions. And I'm not going to take any of his thunder, but it really got my attention because digital currency is this concept of Chromium cash. Chromium cash is truly anonymous digital currency, but you had to have a trusted issuer. And so what caught my attention about what Chris was doing was when he talked about how Bitcoin can enable some of these things, like true Chromium cash. And then, of course, all these other things he was talking about that this concept of open transactions can do just blew my mind. And I said, I got to pay attention to him, follow him, and know that what he's building is something that we need to really sit up and take notice for. So he's also a founder of a company called Monetas out of Switzerland. Been living out there for a while. He just came back. And he's just launched a brand new company called Stash Crypto. And so let's give a big hand for Mr. Chris Odom. Let's welcome him right up to the stage.
Now, I started a new company with Cliff Balsley. He's the founder of Hushmail. And the new company is called Stash. And the website is stashcrypto.com. So check it out. More than ever than at any other point in my life, I have a lot of certainty and clarity about exactly what it is that I'm doing, what it is that I'm going to do. And my focus is on cryptographic proofs. And finally, I have enough infrastructure built up that I'm beginning to focus much more intently on the end user than I did before. Whereas before I was focusing on building lower layers, the library layer, an API layer, and so on. And now I have this stuff in place. Have you ever had an experience in your life where something is so obvious to you and other people just cannot see it? And it'd be right in front of their face, and you just get this blank stare. They just do not see what you're saying or what you're showing them. Did anyone ever see that movie, The Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah.
Remember that scene where he says, "How can you be so obtuse?" So let me tell you a little story. When I was about 17 years old, I was attending the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and they had various labs over the campus. Most of them were VAX VMS, for those who know what that is. But there was one lab that was a Next lab. Anyone here remember Next Computer? So it was 1992, I'm now 40, and I was sitting in the Next lab, and I remember I was using the operating system. This is the same operating system, by the way, that is now running on this machine. It has been changed, it's become the Mac OS that most people use today. It was originally the Next OS, the same operating system I was using in that lab. And I remember just looking at it and just marveling at how beautiful it was. Back then, everyone used Windows 3.11. So not Windows 95, Windows 3.11. And so I bought NextStep, the operating system, and I ran it at home on a Pentium machine. And I remember just sitting there, looking at it and using it, just thinking, how is it that the whole world is using Windows 3.11? Well, I'm sitting here using this. And I almost started to doubt myself a little bit. I thought, either I'm crazy, either I don't get it, I'm missing something, or the whole world is. It's almost enough to make you doubt your instincts. Did you guys know that Microsoft used to have Microsoft used to have 86% of all the devices ran Microsoft. Does anyone know how many that is today? What percentage? Anyone care to guess?
25.
14. In the past 7 years or so, Microsoft has gone from 86% of all devices to 14% of all devices. So it's been over 20 years, but the world came along. Now, I realized a few years ago that everything has changed with Bitcoin in regards to security. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There's two kinds of security. One of them is not real. The first kind of security is where you have a private key, and when you encrypt something to someone's public key, only his private key can open it, and not even a national government can break that encryption. That's what I call real security. The other kind of security is where you have to prove yourself or authenticate yourself to someone else who has all the power and all the authority. I'll give you an example. Certificate authority. A certificate authority is actually the textbook definition of a man-in-the-middle attack. This is an attack, is what it is, from a security perspective. And they have all the power, they hold all the keys, they issue all the certs. And there's certain benefits to that, because if you lose your key, then you can always go to them and prove yourself to them, show them your ID and so on, and they'll give you a new key. And as long as you trust them, that could be useful. And that's how banks are today. Banks have all the power, they're holding all the cards, they're holding all the money, and you have to prove yourself to them and obey their rules, and if you lose your bank card, you go in and show your ID and they'll give you a new one. And many Bitcoin companies today are trying to go down this road. But Bitcoin changes all this drastically. With Bitcoin, if you lose your key, there is no one you can turn to. It's a hard limit. It's that one kind of security instead of the other. Now this is a good thing, but it presents users with new problems they never had to face before. Before they could just go into the bank and get a new card. But now we have to worry about the security of that key. We have to worry about the backups of that key. We have to deal with these things. Now that's not necessarily bad, but what it means is that the software has to solve these problems for the user. The software has to automate these things for the user, because otherwise the user can't practically use it. If the user loses his key and he's screwed, that's a software problem. That should never happen. So a few years ago, I realized where things were going. I realized that the best possible security on the server side is going to be voting pools. And no one's doing voting pools right now. Now there are other various multi-sig solutions, but the critical component of voting pools is open transactions, because you need the cryptographic proofs before you have the information that you need to do the multi-sig vote. We've been coding very hard on this, and we're getting very close, and I believe we're going to turn the world upside down when it's released. And sometimes I'm filled with amazement that no one else has figured this out. There's going to be a separation of powers, and no one can see it. Everyone is still building 20th century financial institutions with the words bit in their name, or the word coin in their name, or the word chain in their name. And they are going to get disrupted by the very technology they were supposed to be spearheading. Now, you may remember a few years ago at the Miami speech, I predicted the downfall of Mt. Gox. This is not a difficult prediction to make. Even today, these things are still happening. Now, some people think that the solution is to get institutionalized. They think that the institutions will bring us security and bring us safety. But we all know how that goes. And what will happen when the technology is released that will make the little guy operator more secure than the big regulated institutions? The bottom line is that technology now exists to enable complete user autonomy, and that is where things are going.
Yay.
We see this as clear as day. We have special people in this room if they can see this. Anyone who is not building that vision is building on the past instead of on the future, because people are going to use technology that gives them autonomy. And that's going to be all she wrote. It will be just like Napster and BitTorrent. There's no centralized version of BitTorrent. There's no regulated version of BitTorrent. That ship has sailed, and this is where Bitcoin is taking us, to complete user autonomy. So my question is that what you're building? I know it's scary sometimes and radical, but in this industry, if that is not what you're building, you're going to find yourself just like Microsoft, turned upside down in a small amount of time. And I also realized that the best security on the client side was hardware wallets. If you have to keep a private key, then you need somewhere private to keep it. So I realized years ago that the best security on the server side would be voting pools, and the best security on the client side would be a hardware wallet. And I've been focused intently on these things ever since. I have no ounce of doubt in my mind that this is where it's going to go. Now, you guys remember when Steve Jobs came out saying, "It just works"? Remember that? It just works. It's a great catchphrase. You ever thought about how important that is when it comes to crypto? Crypto is a special case. It's complicated, and if you get it wrong, it doesn't work. It fails. Now, if the user has to understand all this complication and he's not going to use it right, that means the crypto is basically broken. Failure to have good design in crypto is broken crypto. This means the software has to make it just work for the user. Now, one thing I want to point out really quick, is anyone here familiar with hierarchical deterministic wallets? BIP32? We have an educated crowd. So you have this one seed. If you can memorize it, then it can recreate this hierarchical deterministic wallet and generate all these keys off of that one seed. And they're all deterministic. So you can go and recreate the seed and recreate all those exact same keys all over again and bring them all back. Now, I find this very interesting because this means you can have recovery without backup. In open transactions, we traditionally used RSA keys. We would generate them randomly, and then we had to store them. We had to keep them safe, because if you lost them, they were gone forever. So I had to deal with these backup issues. I think, well, how do I back this up? I have to automate it for the user. The user shouldn't even have to think about it. It should just work. If it doesn't, he loses his key, we have a bad scenario, especially when it's money, people's money. So we just finished adding LiveSecP 256K1 to open transactions. It still supports RSA. You can even use it with certificate authority if you want to, but I don't think that's where things are going. I think things are going to the user has his own key and it's deterministic. So we've added the ECC keys to open transactions. And soon we'll also be adding ED 25519. So anyone in here who's doing any kind of hardware development, please support those two curves. Now, one of the reasons that we've done this is to have Trezor integration. Now, when I first came in here, when I first flew out to Vegas, my original plan was to do a big demo. I was going to show you guys all this cool software we've been building, but I decided not to because it's going to go on YouTube and everything. I don't want everyone to see this. But I still have demos, though, that I can show certain special people in confidence. So we have integrated Trezor, and we're going to be using Trezor to do our signing. And I actually got a question today before I came up, where someone asked me, how do you secure these keys? Well, if they're on your computer, which they should not be, then they're encrypted. What? Here's one. Is this for me?
No.
Trezor. There are other hardware wallets, by the way. I'm agnostic, but I like this one. It's a good first integration. Just like when we integrated Bitcoin into OT, it's a good first integration. People say, what about Ripple? What about Ethereum or Litecoin or any of these other things? Those are all great. Bitcoin was just the obvious first choice for the first integration, right? Now, with a hierarchical wallet, people haven't thought about this too much yet, but it's not just Bitcoin keys that you get out of that. is bit message keys and OT NIM IDs. Basically, all these different keys can be generated hierarchically and deterministically and linked together. For example, let's say that I have an OT NIM, an open transactions NIM, and he deposits some money. Normally, you would have to say, well, what's his Bitcoin address? Because if he wants to withdraw, we need to know his Bitcoin address, so now we have to ask him for it, he has to provide it, we put it on file, so that when he does a withdrawal, we have an address to send it to. But if it's a deterministic wallet, then if you know the NIM ID, you already know the corresponding Bitcoin address. And if someone sends you a withdrawal request to sign with a certain NIM ID, then we know for a fact he has the ability to sign on that Bitcoin address. So we can just send Bitcoins to it directly, without ever having to ask for an address. Same thing, like let's say I want to send him a private message on BitMessage. If I have his NIM ID or his Bitcoin address, I can send a message to BitMessage and know that he'll get it without ever having to ask him for his BitMessage address. So I think this is very important, and a lot of our future development is going to take advantage of these abilities. Something else that we're heavily involved in is Bit47. How many people here are aware of Bit47? Payment codes. Heard of that? I prefer to use the word or the phrase payment address because I think they're comparable in many ways to email address. And a Bitcoin address is not. Now, I'll go through the distinction here. With a normal Bitcoin address, there's no return address. You have to generate new keys every time, just so that you know where the money came from. So if someone's going to send me money, I say, wait here, let me generate a key, give him the address, sends the money. Someone else, I generate another key, then he sends me the money. And how do I know which money came from who? Well, because I gave him that address and I gave him that address. That's the only way I can tell which money came from who. So they have to ask for these keys in advance, right? He can't just send. He has to contact me first. This has to get built into the protocol. He has to contact me first, ask for an address, I generate one, give it to him. And you also have to generate new keys for privacy reasons. Everyone knows in Bitcoin that it's a bad move to always receive transfers at the same address. It should be a new address every time. And that's a pain. Also, someone might send the wrong amount. What if I say, oh, I'm going to let you deposit, a Satoshi. I was actually going to do a demo. I thought, let's do this demo and let's let people in the audience deposit a Satoshi and we'll transfer it around on this cool thing. I'm not going to say what it is, but then they can withdraw it back out to the blockchain. And then my partner said, Cliff, he said, well, what if someone sends $1 million? Right? So I said, okay, well, let's call our buddy we know who talks to regulators all the time. And this is an issue. This is just a tech demo. It's a conference. These are paying attendees, right? He says, oh no, this is a serious issue. You cannot, do not do this demo. He says, they probably won't go after you. God, what kind of world do I live in? They probably won't go after you, but if they want to make trouble for you, they could. It's like Halloween. That Halloween feeling. So, if you can't take that risk, that means you can't give him an address until you get one from him first, so you have somewhere to send the $1 million back to. And now you're a money transmitter. And I would be on camera doing that? No way. Now, payment address is much more like email address. For example, you can use the same address every time. So you have a single address, people can always send to that same address, and that means they don't have to ask you first for an address to send to. That changes the protocols. Furthermore, whenever you receive a payment through a payment address, or payment code, Bit47, there is a return address. Both parties can see a complete history of all the transactions that were sent between them. But the critical point is, no one else can, because it uses Diffie-Hellman. So through Diffie-Hellman, we have a shared secret between the two. They're able to have these addresses where they can send money back and forth, and no one else looking at the blockchain can even see it. But the two parties involved, they can see it. You know what this means? This means that all those companies who are sprouting up to provide blockchain analytics on the source of funds, these companies are not going to last. They're going to cease to exist. They are a temporary aberration. They're building on the past instead of the future. They're building towards a 20th century reality instead of a 21st century reality. Now we're coordinating with the team over at Samurai Wallet to get payment addresses implemented. And we're adding them to our own software over at Stash as well. This stuff is coming. Coders are coding on it. How much time do I have? Yeah. I guess I'll just go over one more little thing briefly before I take questions. Smart contracts. Everyone here is pretty familiar with smart contracts? You guys know what the quintessential distinguishing factor is for a smart contract? Any lawyers in the room? Any hands? No lawyers? Not a single lawyer. Wow. The distinguishing factor of a smart contract is that it's self-executing. It executes on its own. You see, most contracts that people make in the legal world are contracts that are designed so that someday, if they have to be enforced, that they have to be enforced in a court of law. They have to be legally enforced. And so they're written that way. They're written based on, we're going to expect that if we have to enforce this, it will be in a court of law, and therefore all these terms are written based on that assumption. And I was talking to a lawyer the other day about smart contracts, and he asked me a question. He said, well, could I use a smart contract for the terms of service on my website? And I thought about it, and I said, here's what you want to put in a smart contract. Here's how you know when you're writing a smart contract instead of a normal legal contract. Because the first thing that you put at the top of the contract is, this contract will not be enforceable in a court of law. This contract is not governed by any legal code and is not enforceable in any court of law. And all signers to this contract agree. And he said, well, why would you do that? It's like the whole point of a contract from his perspective. Right? And I said, first of all, court of laws are not able to enforce these anyway. I said, imagine that you're in court and there's a judge and she says, I have ruled that those bitcoins shall be moved to that address. But it doesn't happen. Even though she has robes and a nice chair and a bailiff with muscles, but the bitcoins don't move. You have to have the private key to move the bitcoins. Because bitcoins are not under legal law, they're under cryptographic law. It's a new form of law that's coming into existence. And so I told him, look, you would never put a terms of service into a smart contract because you can't enforce the terms of service cryptographically, you enforce them legally. Someone comes in and tries to sue you over something and you say, ah ha ha ha, the terms of service were posted. Right? I said, as long as those terms of service are posted on your website, they're perfectly enforceable how they are now without having to use some kind of smart contract. A real smart contract is something that automates money flows, does escrow, does surety bonds, does insurance. These are the sorts of things that we're building with our smart contracts. They automate the money flow. The money goes in here, after so many days, it automatically goes over there, unless a dispute gets triggered. And then maybe an oracle has to come online, or a dispute mediator or an arbitrator to do some adjudication, to choose this way or that way, someone who's a party to the contract. And so when you use a contract like that, the one that you want to use is the one that gives you the least uncertainty, the one that gives you the least liability. And the last thing you want on such a contract is something saying that it's enforceable in court. that, hey, if you sign this smart contract, if you use this smart contract, you're going to end up in court. Who wants to sign that? That's your worst nightmare. When I'm picking a smart contract, I want something that will securely flow the money properly according to its terms, and that will not land me in court. And I'm most likely to pick one that says, not enforceable in a court of law. It's just an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah? Oh, we have any questions? Now's your chance. No, I'll be here for the next 2 days.
So yeah, let's jump into questions. Go ahead, Tom.
Hey Chris, that was a great speech actually. My name is Tone Vase from Brave New Coin. And my question to you is what you were saying about only 2 people being able to view the transactions and what they've done. Do you see this technology advancing and maybe going after something like Facebook and Google and their search engine, just all of internet traffic becoming cryptographic and without all the spying? Do you see it moving into that region as well?
Well, yes, I do. I mean, you guys ever heard the thing about the aliens and the cryptography? You ever heard that before? No. Someone said, well, if there's so many aliens out there, how come we don't see any of them? How come there's no radio waves and transmissions? Because they're all encrypted. So they look like gibberish. Yeah, I think that Bitcoin is as pivotal in innovation as the internet itself. And if you think about, like, what does the human do? What does the human brain do? The human can think, and it can communicate, and he can do things in the real world. And the computers assist us in this. A computer assists us with thinking. It's an information processing tool. And the internet assists us with communication. And Bitcoin is what we use to do things. And I believe, yes, there are going to be value flows online that are probably more important than the basic information flows that preceded them.
Awesome. Other questions? Any other closing remarks you want to share with us? Let's talk about Chromium Cash. How does this play into Stash Crypto, OT? Tell us about that.
Well, Chromium Cash is a form of homomorphism that allows you to have a blind signature, basically, based on blind signatures. So the server is able to sign something without knowing what it is that it's signing. And I mean, we don't have to go through all the technical details of it, but it makes it possible to have fully untraceable cash. So Alice can withdraw cash and deposit cash, just like you might down at a bank. This is digital cash. And the server can see that, and there's receipts even, which she withdrew, $500 or whatever. And then Bob can withdraw cash and deposit cash. But the critical point is that whenever cash is deposited, the server has no idea where it came from. The server knows for a fact that the cash is good, this is provable, but it is not able to ascertain which withdrawal that cash came from. That's the base. Now, in open transactions, by the way, my new company Stash is based on open transactions. There are a variety of different financial instruments. Cash is just one of them. So sometimes people get confused. They think that all of the OT instruments are completely untraceable. That is not true. The cash instrument is untraceable. But there are many other instruments like checks, vouchers, market trading, smart contracts, recurring payments, and so on. Sprague has a question.
All right, so the encrypted messaging piece and the isolation of the transaction data is really cool. What's interesting, however, also is that in the broader market, while people like Goldman Sachs just raised $100 million for Symphony, one of the challenges they have while building an encrypted messaging protocol is that the SEC requires a copy of the messages between traders. And so while they want isolation from Bloomberg and the carriers and everybody else for reasons that Goldman and everybody else would appreciate, there's also a requirement for copies. So any capability exists where I can have, in a two-party transaction, a third-party observer?
Yes, this capability does exist. Yes. I mean, obviously the node that's processing the transaction, and also we were going to have a pool of nodes in order to store the funds so that no individual node can steal funds. And in order to make this possible, they have to do multi-sig vote to release funds. In order to make that possible, they must audit each other's receipts. Because if they did not, they would not have enough information to safely do the multi-sig vote. And that's a problem with all the multi-sig implementations in the world today. And that's the distinguishing factor there. Yeah. Now, of course, it's also possible for people to send each other encrypted private messages, and no one can stop that either. Yeah. Of course.
Very good. Okay, a couple more questions and we'll jump on to our next.
Hi Chris, I was wondering if you could tell us what your thoughts are on micro-transactions, less than a cent type transactions.
Well, that's actually one of the things I was going to demo today. I'll be able to show people. Microtransactions are not feasible on the blockchain because it's too expensive, but they're perfectly feasible in an off-chain system. Actually, you could make a really cheap, easy, I could probably sit here in 5 minutes or 10 minutes and code a little off-chain microtransaction system that wasn't secure. Well, maybe not 10 minutes, but you know, that's how coders estimate time. 10 more minutes. You know, 4 hours later. So it's very easy to write one that'll, you know, trade around small amounts in an insecure way. But if you want to do it securely, then I think you have to use a system like Open Transactions. Because it's cheap, it's not a blockchain, so it's very cheap to run them there. It's actually issued a currency, just a test currency based on the Bitcoin testnet. And the unit is the Satoshi. Actually, the unit is the bit, right? Satoshis are like the cents, like the 2 zeros after the decimal point. And I believe there are 100 million Satoshis for Bitcoin, right? And so that seems pretty small. I think there's 0.026 cents per Satoshi or something less than that. Or maybe that's per bit. So maybe 100 times smaller for a Satoshi. But as I was creating this test currency the other day, I was talking to some of our developers, and we realized, you know, hey, this is just the size that it has to be to still get it back out of the chain. Because I can demonstrate now, taking from Open Transactions and withdrawing directly to blockchain addresses. And I said, you know, we could make one that was 100 millionth of a Satoshi if we wanted to. You could make a currency that there's 1 billion of these per Satoshi. Now, I think at that point you're starting to get to a point where even Open Transactions may not be able to feasibly do this to where it's still cheap. You know, there's still some cost. There's still some cost to this, the cryptographic signing and the electricity and so on. So, yeah, I mean, we can basically take it as small as you want to go in any currency.
So Chris, we're unfortunately running out of time, but if you could just, in closing, summarize briefly what are the main products Stash Crypto is going to want to be releasing soon?
I don't think I can say that in public.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but I will say that we're working on voting pools, and I think that's what matters to the Bitcoin community. And I'll also say that, you know, yes, we are approached by people in the Bitcoin community, we're approached by exchanges and so on, but some of the other things that are approaching us are completely unrelated to Bitcoin. And it's very interesting to me how people are coming up with, they have this dire need that they come up with, and they're all so completely different from each other. But I don't want to say too much, this is all going out on YouTube.
All right, well, sounds good. We'll catch him in the hall, right, guys? All right, thank you very much, Chris, for the big
Thank you, everybody.